Every look she gives feels like a secret meant only for me. The first time our paths crossed, there was an unspoken weight in the air, a subtle tension that neither of us could or wanted to ignore. Standing across the room, she looked effortless, as if the world had been arranged just so for her presence. She was 40, undeniably graceful, her long black hair falling softly over her shoulders, catching the warm light of the late afternoon. Her eyes, dark brown and framed by the slightest hint of smile lines, held a depth that made it impossible to look away. I was 23, young enough to feel awkward, yet old enough to recognize the gravity in this encounter. The hum of the city outside faded as soon as our eyes met, the noise of everything else dimming until it seemed like it was just the two of us suspended in a quiet bubble. She smiled lightly, the kind of smile that felt like an invitation and a question all at once. It wasn't loud or forced. It was quiet, steady, and confident, carrying the ease of someone who had lived through challenges but remained open to possibility. My chest tightened almost instinctively, a mixture of nervousness and fascination. I noticed the subtle ways she moved, how her fingers brushed against the edge of the table, how she leaned slightly forward, as though drawn by an invisible force. Every small motion conveyed her comfort in her own skin, yet there was also a fragile vulnerability in the slight hesitation of her glance, as if she were quietly daring someone to understand her fully. The conversation began casually, about trivial matters at first, books, coffee, the weather, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity and quiet longing beneath each word. My voice felt different around her, careful yet genuine, like it mattered which words I chose. When she laughed, it was soft but resonant, vibrating in a way that made my own heartbeat thrum faster. I noticed the warmth of her presence, not just in her voice or her smile, but in the way she occupied space, commanding attention without demanding it. Her hand briefly touched mine while reaching for a cup, a fleeting contact that sent a shiver through me, more meaningful than anything either of us said aloud. In that first encounter, I realized that attraction wasn't just about physical appeal. It was about the unspoken language between two people. Her confidence intertwined with her quiet vulnerability created a magnetic pull, one I couldn't, and didn't want to resist. I was aware of the age difference, the silent questions it brought, but somehow it felt irrelevant in this moment. What mattered was the curiosity, the tentative connection that flickered in the spaces between words and gestures. That day ended with no dramatic gestures, no confessions, just the lingering sensation of closeness, like a faint imprint on the skin and memory. Even as I walked away, I felt it, the subtle, undeniable awareness that something significant had begun, something neither of us fully understood yet, but that neither of us could ignore. The second encounter was charged with a quiet intensity, a tension that made the air between us feel thicker than before. It wasn't planned, simply a chance meeting at a small cafe bathed in the soft glow of late morning sunlight. She was 40, her elegance unmistakable, dressed in a tailored blouse that complemented her curvy figure and graceful posture. Her long black hair cascaded down her back, catching the light in streaks of rich, dark shine. Every detail of her presence, the subtle sway of her movements, the gentle tilt of her head, spoke of maturity and confidence, yet there was a fleeting vulnerability in her dark brown eyes, hinting at emotions she carefully guarded. I was 23, acutely aware of the nervous excitement thrumming through me as I approached her, feeling both drawn and uncertain in equal measure. Our conversation started softly, casual at first, with light laughter over trivial observations. The rhythm of the cafe, the aroma of fresh coffee, the warmth of the sunlight spilling through the windows. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet probing, a mutual curiosity neither of us dared to voice outright. Every gesture, every glance carried meaning. When her hand brushed mine over the table, it lingered just slightly longer than necessary, a small yet deliberate signal of intimacy. I felt a jolt of awareness at the contact, the warmth of her skin, the subtle electricity that seemed to flow through that simple touch. It wasn't just attraction, it was a sense of recognition, a shared understanding that something unspoken was developing between us. As the minutes passed, the conversation deepened. Her voice, calm and steady, drew me in with its warmth. I noticed the slight smile lines at the corners of her eyes, the faint curve of her lips as she listened intently, nodding ever so slightly. Her posture was relaxed yet deliberate, a reflection of her self-assuredness, but her eyes betrayed a subtle tension, a quiet hope that I would meet her unspoken gaze. I realized that what was happening wasn't just a flirtation. It was the start of an emotional connection, an invisible thread weaving between us, binding curiosity, desire, and the fragile acknowledgement of something real. There was a pause, just long enough for the silence to thrum with possibility. She leaned forward slightly, her elbow resting gently on the table, her fingers curling around her cup. The movement was graceful, intimate, yet completely natural. I felt my own pulse quicken, my awareness sharpened by the unspoken question in the air. I wanted to reach out to close the space between us, but hesitation held me back, a mix of respect, uncertainty, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the age gap. By the end of our meeting, there was no dramatic confession, no overt declaration. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a subtle shift in the space between us. The world outside the cafe seemed to fade as we parted ways, leaving behind the lingering warmth of her presence, the gentle echo of her voice, and the undeniable realization that this connection was different, something rare and meaningful that neither of us could easily dismiss. I walked away carrying that silent charge, knowing that the tension between us had deepened, and that every future encounter would carry the weight of this unspoken bond. The third encounter carried a weight I hadn't expected, a subtle gravity that made every gesture and glance feel amplified. It happened in the quiet corner of a public library, the kind where the air smells faintly of aged paper and polished wood. She was 40, dressed in a soft cream blouse and navy trousers, the fabric falling effortlessly over her figure, highlighting her graceful, confident presence. Her long black hair was tucked behind one ear, revealing the delicate curve of her jaw and the slight laugh lines at the corners of her dark brown eyes. She exuded a natural elegance that was impossible to ignore, yet it was her quiet vulnerability, the gentle lift of her eyebrows, the soft tilt of her head, that drew me in and kept me tethered to the moment. I was 23, acutely aware of every breath, every heartbeat that seemed to sync with the subtle rhythm of her movements. We sat across from each other at a small wooden table, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows and painting patterns of light across the polished surface. Our conversation started as casual inquiries about a shared interest, books we loved, authors who inspired us. But there was an undercurrent of tension that neither of us attempted to hide. Every pause seemed charged, every laugh felt a little too intimate. Her hand brushed against mine when she reached for her cup, and the fleeting touch sent a ripple of awareness through me. It wasn't just the warmth of her skin, but the unspoken question it carried. Did I feel it too? Her eyes met mine, holding a gaze that was both searching and gentle, as though she were trying to understand the depth of what was building between us. I noticed the subtle expressions that revealed more than words ever could. The slight parting of her lips, the quiet inhale before she spoke, the way her fingers traced the edge of her cup absent-mindedly. Each gesture spoke of thoughtfulness, of care, and of a quiet longing that mirrored my own. I wanted to lean forward, to close the invisible gap, but hesitation kept me anchored. There was respect, yes, but also the quiet recognition that what we were sharing was fragile, precious, and needed time to grow. We talked about trivial things, plans for the weekend, the change of seasons, the light filtering through the library windows. But underneath it all was a silent conversation, one of subtle touches, lingering glances, and small smiles that carried far more meaning than spoken words. The tension between us was a quiet flame, neither rushed nor forced, but steady and growing, drawing us closer with every shared moment. When it was time to leave, our hands met briefly in a handshake that lingered just a second too long, a subtle promise of the connection that had begun to form. Her eyes held mine a moment longer, and in that look, I felt the shared understanding. This was no ordinary meeting. Something profound was unfolding, an emotional intimacy that neither of us could ignore. I walked away feeling the echo of her presence still pressed lightly against my chest, knowing that each encounter would deepen this intricate web of connection, desire, and mutual respect. By the end of the afternoon, it was clear. This was not a fleeting attraction, but the beginning of a slow, deliberate, and emotionally charged journey. Every smile, every brush of hands, every shared pause was a step closer to something neither of us fully understood yet, but both of us were irresistibly drawn toward. The evening was crisp, the kind of gentle autumn air that carries a hint of wood smoke and the promise of quiet nights. The meeting was unplanned, yet it felt inevitable, like two currents colliding despite careful navigation. She was 40, a 40-year-old American Latino woman with long black hair cascading over her shoulders, dressed in a soft beige cardigan over a light blouse, paired with dark jeans that moved gracefully with her every step. Her dark brown eyes held a contemplative intensity, slightly shadowed by the streetlights as she stepped toward me, each movement measured yet effortlessly fluid. Her lightly tanned skin glowed subtly under the warm city lights, and the slight smile lines at the corners of her eyes deepened whenever she noticed something amusing or heartening. I was 23, feeling acutely aware of the space between us, the gentle brush of her sleeve against my arm as we passed, the warmth that lingered longer than reason dictated. We wandered through the quiet streets, the hum of distant traffic and the soft crunch of fallen leaves underfoot composing a symphony of intimacy. Words came slowly, deliberately. Each sentence was a thread weaving a connection that felt deeper than casual conversation should allow. Her voice carried a warmth that reached beyond the sound itself. It resonated in the space around me, brushing against my awareness, making the silence in between moments feel impossibly rich. Occasionally, her hand would brush against mine, subtle, unforced gestures that spoke of a longing neither of us fully dared to name. It was in these small touches, the fleeting warmth that lingered like a soft echo, that the true depth of our bond began to manifest. At a quiet cafe tucked into a corner of the street, we settled near a large window, the city lights painting a mosaic of color on her face. She lifted her cup, fingers brushing against mine, and for a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a quiet hesitance that mirrored the tension I felt in my own chest. It was clear that beneath the confidence she wore like a tailored jacket, there existed a heart navigating the uncertain currents of desire and restraint. We spoke about life, about fleeting moments and the choices that shape us, but beneath each word lay an unspoken conversation, a negotiation of feelings, of hesitation, of curiosity. The warmth of her presence, the gentle alignment of our gestures, the subtle sync of our breathing, all contributed to an intimacy that felt unspoken yet profoundly understood. When she laughed, the sound was soft, contained, yet it resonated deeply, anchoring me in the moment with a clarity that left my mind quiet and attentive. As we prepared to part ways, her hand lingered on mine for a fleeting second longer than necessary, and her gaze held mine with a silent plea that was impossible to dismiss. There was an unspoken understanding. This connection could not be ignored, and yet the fragility of it demanded care, patience, and attention. I walked away feeling the imprint of her presence, the echo of her laughter, the weight of her gaze, all reminders that what had begun was more than chance. This slow, deliberate unfolding of connection was pulling us both toward an emotional precipice, one neither of us could yet name, but both of us felt in the quiet of our shared silences. The next afternoon carried a quiet stillness, the kind that felt almost sacred, as if the world had dimmed just enough to allow our thoughts to speak. The sun poured through the wide living room windows, golden and warm, touching her hair in a way that made it glimmer like silk. She was 40, a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair cascading down her back, dressed in a soft lavender blouse and tailored cream trousers that complemented her curvy figure and graceful posture. The slight smile lines at the corners of her dark brown eyes deepened whenever she noticed a detail I might have missed. A faint freckle, a small scuff on a table, the tilt of a picture frame. There was a quiet confidence in her movements, a graceful awareness of the space around her. Yet beneath it lay a vulnerability that made each gesture feel intimate, even when casual. I was 23, and the contrast between her composed elegance and subtle hesitance stirred a tension in me I could not ignore. We sat near the bay window, the warm sunlight spilling over the floor and illuminating the small pile of books and coffee cups between us. Every glance she cast was deliberate, lingering on the corners of my face as if memorizing, cataloging, understanding. Her hand moved to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and the slight brush of her fingers against her neck sent a warmth through me, unspoken and undeniable. The conversation drifted, a mix of laughter, pauses, and quiet confessions that felt heavier than ordinary words. Each pause between sentences became a space filled with expectation, a place where the heart spoke louder than the mouth. Her voice carried a softness that contrasted with the strength in her posture, a melody that lingered in the air long after she had spoken. I noticed the way her eyes followed my hands when I gestured, how they caught the light and reflected a vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see. The room seemed smaller, cozier, as if the universe itself had arranged this moment to make the closeness feel inevitable. She shifted slightly closer, the subtle movement closing the gap between us, and the air seemed charged with unspoken understanding. The brush of our shoulders was accidental yet intimate, enough to make my pulse quicken, enough to make the silence feel heavy with meaning. As the afternoon stretched on, there was a sense of discovery in every small gesture. A shared laugh, a fleeting touch, the careful brushing of her hand against mine when reaching for the same book. It was as though we were both aware of the magnetic pull that existed between us, testing boundaries without words, exploring the depth of connection without acknowledging it aloud. Her dark brown eyes held mine steadily, conveying thoughts and feelings that words could never capture. In those moments, I realized that this relationship was no longer about mere attraction or curiosity. It had become a delicate dance of trust, closeness, and restraint. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the floor, our hands brushed again, slightly longer this time, almost daring each other to acknowledge the tension that had grown between us. There was a quiet promise in that touch, a subtle acknowledgement that what we were experiencing mattered more than either of us could say. The emotional weight of the moment pressed gently against my chest, a reminder that this slow-burning connection was reaching a turning point. Every glance, every touch, every pause was a step closer to a revelation neither of us could yet voice, yet both of us felt in the marrow of our bones. Evening had begun to settle, the sky painted in soft oranges and pinks that reflected through the tall windows of her apartment. The warmth of the day lingered, casting a gentle glow on the wooden floor, and the air smelled faintly of her lavender-scented candle. She sat on the plush couch, a 40-year-old American Latina woman with long black hair that caught the last rays of sunlight, her curvy figure poised gracefully as she leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on her knees. The faint smile lines at the corners of her dark brown eyes deepened when she noticed the small ways I hesitated, the nervous way my fingers traced the edge of a book or my gaze lingered on her. I was 23, seated opposite her, feeling the gravity of her presence like a quiet pull that made every breath more deliberate. Our conversation was lighter now, teasing and playful, but beneath the humor was a current of tension neither of us fully acknowledged. Her eyes held mine with a steady, intimate curiosity, as if she was trying to read the unspoken thoughts that lingered between us. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the soft movement revealing the gentle curve of her neck and the subtle tanned glow of her skin. There was a vulnerability there, framed by a poised confidence, that made the ordinary act of sitting together feel electric. Her hand accidentally brushed mine as she reached for her mug, and the warmth of that contact lingered longer than it should have, a silent reminder of the closeness we were building. The room itself seemed to shrink, the world outside fading as our connection intensified. The soft hum of the city below became a backdrop, almost unnoticed, to the rhythm of our conversation and the quiet intimacy of shared space. Every small gesture, her tilt of the head, the slight shift in her posture, the way she leaned closer when emphasizing a point, carried weight. My chest tightened with each subtle move, each fleeting touch, and each lingering glance. It was not just attraction, it was the recognition of a bond forming, an emotional intimacy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. She laughed softly at something I said, a warm, low sound that made my pulse quicken. Her eyes crinkled slightly at the edges, revealing the gentle passage of time and life experience, making her mature beauty even more captivating. I felt a strange mix of awe and comfort, drawn to the grace in her movements, the thoughtful cadence of her voice, and the way she occupied space with effortless elegance. The faint brush of her fingers against mine again, as if by accident, sent a jolt of awareness through me, an acknowledgement of the tension we had been dancing around for hours. As twilight deepened, the golden glow of the fading sun cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the curve of her shoulders and the gentle fall of her hair. Every unspoken word, every pause, every lingering look between us created a language of its own. There was a magnetic pull, a subtle but undeniable thread weaving our emotions together. The intimacy was no longer just emotional, it was physical in its quiet, YouTube-safe way. A hand resting near mine, a shoulder brushing against mine, the shared warmth of proximity. The weight of what we were feeling pressed gently but persistently, a slow crescendo that hinted at the moment of truth looming just beyond the horizon of that evening. The night had settled fully, wrapping the city in a quiet stillness, the soft glow of streetlights casting a warm hue through the apartment windows. She stood by the balcony, the faint breeze teasing strands of her long black hair, and I watched mesmerized. The 40-year-old American Latina woman radiated a graceful confidence, her curvy figure silhouetted against the golden lights of the city below. Her dark brown eyes met mine with a vulnerability that belied her composed exterior, And in that moment, the world outside didn't exist. Only the tension and warmth that filled the room. I was 23, every sense attuned to her presence, every heartbeat echoing the unspoken feelings we had been circling around for days. The space between us was small yet charged, the kind of closeness that made ordinary gestures feel electric. Her hand hovered near mine as she shifted, and though we didn't touch, the energy between us was undeniable. She smiled, the faint laugh lines at the corners of her eyes deepening, revealing both maturity and a soft vulnerability that made her beauty feel alive. The way she stood, poised yet relaxed, spoke volumes about the comfort and trust that had slowly grown between us. I could sense the hesitations and fears that lingered beneath her confidence, the same quiet tension mirrored in my own chest, and it created a rhythm, a slow, intimate dance of emotions neither of us dared to name out loud. We spoke softly, words almost unnecessary, letting the silence fill with understanding. Each glance carried weight, each subtle movement. Her shoulder brushing against mine as she leaned slightly forward, the faint brush of fingers as she adjusted her hair, sent a thrill of closeness that neither of us could ignore. There was a magnetic pull in the way she observed me, as if reading my thoughts through the careful pauses and small, deliberate gestures. Her presence was comforting and intoxicating all at once, a balance of warmth and anticipation that left me both grounded and breathless. Her voice dropped to a whisper, the sound intimate, almost confessional, and it made the air between us feel heavier with desire and unspoken truths. I could feel the soft warmth of her near me, the subtle fragrance of her lavender-scented lotion mingling with the evening air, creating a sensory memory I knew I would never forget. Every small interaction, the tilt of her head, the slight shift of her body, the way her gaze lingered on mine, was a conversation in itself, conveying emotions deeper than words could capture. As she stepped closer, the distance finally closing, our eyes locked, conveying mutual acknowledgement of the connection we had nurtured so delicately. Her hand reached out, brushing gently against mine, a touch filled with promise and understanding. The city lights outside blurred into insignificance, replaced by the quiet intimacy of this single, shared moment. We both knew this was the culmination of days of subtle tension, careful glances, and unspoken feelings. The warmth of proximity, the emotional resonance, and the magnetic pull between us coalesced into a sense of inevitability. This connection could no longer be ignored. In that suspended moment, poised between hesitation and surrender, the truth hung in the air. This was no fleeting attraction. Something meaningful had taken root, delicate yet strong, ready to grow. Every heartbeat, every glance, every soft breath shared in that intimate space confirmed it. The night had become ours, a perfect culmination of slow-burn tension, emotional intimacy, and quiet desire. And as we finally allowed the unspoken feelings to settle, the promise of what could follow shimmered in the air, warm and undeniable, leaving nothing left unsaid.